Hello and welcome to Future Squared. Stephen Hawking once said that intelligence is the ability to adapt to change, so let's adapt. My name is Steve Goveski, and each week I'll bring you conversations with preeminent thought leaders from a variety of fields to help you think in a multidisciplinary way, kick goals in your professional and personal life, and better navigate what is fast becoming a brave, new world. Future Squared is brought to you by Collective Campus, an innovation accelerator that works with organizations to unlock their people's latent potential to create more impact for humanity and lead more fulfilling lives. If you need help driving your organization's innovation strategy, visit collectivecampus.io. And without further ado,
come with me if you want to live.
In today's age, it can be hard to find the time to sit down and learn more, especially if you've not yet turned off your push notifications like I've been telling you to. You might hear some of my author interviews and think, wow, I'd love to read that book, but with so many great books out there, you don't have the time to read them all. Well, there's one app I highly recommend, and it's called Blinkist. Blinkist takes the best key takeaways and need-to-know info from thousands of non-fiction books and condenses them down into just 15-minute reads. That's 900 seconds. Prefer to listen to books? Blinkist has you covered. As an advocate of short feedback loops, I like Blinkist because I can learn and apply key concepts to my business and life faster, which means I get results faster. I use Blinkist when I'm in the gym, pounding the pavement, and commuting. I've listened to books like Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari and Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman on Blinkist. Two books you should most definitely check out. Right now, for a limited time, Blinkist has a special offer just for Future Squared listeners. Go to blinkist.com/futuresquared to start your free 7-day trial. That's Blinkist, spelled Blinkist. Blinkist.com/futuresquared to start your free 7-day trial. Blinkist.com/futuresquared. And now for today's guest.
You never know how what you're doing now is preparing you for your future. You know, like I never knew being on a movie set that taking orders from my platoon, OIC was preparing me to take orders from a director. You know, I never knew that, doing speaking events and doing public speaking at corporations was preparing me to deliver lines on a movie set with, 100 people on set and the camera's on me and a director saying action.
Welcome back to Future Squared for episode number 349 with Remi Adeleke. Remi is many things. Former royalty, an ex-Navy SEAL, an author, entrepreneur, and producer. But most of all, he's a symbol of perseverance. Having gone from Nigerian opulence at the age of 5 to drug dealing on the streets of the Bronx as a teenager, Remi knows a thing or two about tough times and how to overcome them with nothing but sheer tenacity and hard work. He's the author of Transformed, a Navy SEAL's unlikely journey from the throne of Africa to the streets of the Bronx to defying all odds. The title, a play on words on his most recent acting credit in Transformers. Expect to take a hell of a lot out of this conversation, including 1. Remi's fascinating story of going from rock star to rock bottom and back again. 2. Why it's often darkest before the dawn and that propels us into action. And 3. Why, if you know the way broadly, you will begin to see it in everything. We also geek out on early 90s hip-hop wars and the Eddie Murphy classic Coming to America. But really, this doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of what we explored in this fascinating conversation. So strap yourself in for an hour with the one and only Remi Adeleke. Welcome to the show, Remi.
Welcome. Thank you for having me on, brother.
No, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the program, and you're joining me all the way from sunny Los Angeles, California.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
We were just having a quick chat before the show about the tacos, and I'm led to believe by many people from San Diego that they have by far the better tacos, and I hear you've been having quite a few of them.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I spent most of my my military career in San Diego, and
Yeah,
San Diego is the last big city before the
from
Mexican border,
Mexico.
so it's hard for them to mess up tacos.
Yeah, what was that like? The post workout routine? You know, smash out the deadlifts and then go and consume some tacos.
Oh, that was pre-workout, post-workout, mid-workout, all workout.
Love it, man. Love it. Well, I have to say, man, like this episode is podcast is about 350 episodes in, but this is the first time we've ever had royalty on the show.
Oh, nice. I'll take it. I'll take that coin.
Well, I mean, you were probably too young to even remember, you know, all the opulence that came with being Nigerian royalty. But I mean, it didn't really last that long. You were 5 years old when you essentially vacated that position. I mean, I'd love for you to unpack what happened for our audience.
Yeah. So I was born into a very wealthy family. My father was a well-known Nigerian engineer, philanthropist, businessman. I mean, you name it, he did it. He owned car dealerships. He owned a engineering firm. He actually had businesses in London as well. Mm-hmm. He was one of the first black men on the board of the World Trade Center in New York City. He was on various boards in London, and obviously he was a big-time Nigerian chief, as well as a businessman in Nigeria. He engineered one of the first man-made islands in the world that exists to this day, and that island is known as Banana Island. Wow. It's right off of the coast of Lagos. Mm-hmm. And he had invested millions and millions of dollars, not only into buying the property, which was a lagoon, which he converted into an island, but he also spent millions of dollars in development, hiring Dutch engineers to dredge the foreshore, and then signing contracts with major outlets so that they could be housed on the island. But right after the island was fully formed, the Nigerian government, being very corrupt at that time and still corrupt to this day, they decided, oh, you can't have this anymore. Yeah. The federal government was never supposed to sell this to you because it belongs to the state government, which, they could have said that to my dad before he started dredging the foreshore, but they waited until there was actual land to say this to him. And my dad went into a quick battle with them, and he died, days later. Wow. And when he died, we went from rich, having everything, traveling the world, cars, nannies, drivers, living on a compound, living on Victoria Island, you name it, we had it, to having absolutely nothing, poor. And my mom being American, I tell people all the time that my mom and my dad's story is the real coming to America story. I'm not sure if your audience ever watched the movie with Eddie Murphy.
Yeah, well, what I remember from that movie, Remi, is Eddie's character getting potential suitors to be his wife stand on one foot and bark like a dog.
Well, my mom was far from that. My mom was she was probably the equivalent to the main love interest. She was this sassy New Yorker and, very intelligent. And she was,
she didn't work for Mickey D's though, right?
No, she didn't work for McDonald's, whatever it was called.
Yeah.
They met at an art gallery, Metropolitan Museum of Natural History, and they got married 5 months later, and then she moved to Nigeria and was exposed to all of this new world. So when my dad died, my mom was just like, there's no way I'm raising my kids here in Africa.
Yeah.
And so she permanently relocated us back to what she knew, New York City, and I grew up in the Bronx.
Yeah, and I mean, you grew up in the Bronx from pretty much the age of 5, and I know young African Americans who are children of single parent households are basically 9 times more likely to drop out of high school and about 20 times more likely to end up in prison than any other demographic in that part of the world. So, I mean, what was it like growing up in the Bronx in the 80s and early 90s?
Well, in the late 80s, you had the crack epidemic, which was huge. Crack was just exploded, and it was wreaking havoc on the Bronx, especially the South Bronx. There was a park that was pretty much right on the same street where I grew up on, and the park was always filled with crackheads wandering around, sleeping on the benches. Obviously, there was drugs all over the streets. And when I was coming up, the mafia was still prevalent. So I remember, going into local bodegas or local stores and seeing mafia guys come in their suits to collect, a tax from the local store owners. Prostitution was prevalent at the time. Gangs really began to come up, and when I was coming up, Most of the gangs, they control the drugs. That was their thing. But then a little bit later, they begin to migrate into, more violent acts, more jumping people and rival gangs, killing each other and that sort of thing. It was a rough environment to grow up in, man. I was exposed to a lot of things that a lot of young people in America are not exposed to, from, getting drugs to, getting jumped myself, being in the middle of shootouts and, having, friends get killed and having friends go to jail. And then ultimately finding my way into illegal activity where I was, selling drugs at a young age. And then, that progressed to running high-level scams. And, by the time I was 19, I was running a full-fledged illegal enterprise where I was bringing, thousands and thousands of dollars in a week, doing things I shouldn't have been doing.
Yeah, and I understand you also ran a fake sneaker business.
Yeah. I had to see it.
So you got to tell me about this, man. Like, where did the sneakers come from? How much were you selling them for? Were these Nike Air Jordan fakes? What was the deal?
No, they were real sneakers.
Right.
My dad. I tell people all the time, I had my dad's mind. My dad was very resourceful. He always had a way of figuring out a way where there was no way. And when it came to making money, I came up with some creative ways to make money. One of which was I had got this job at a sneaker store when I was 15. It was called Athlete's Foot, and there's more to the story. I explain all in my book, but I ended up coming up with this scam where instead of charging the customers on their credit card, I would tell them to give me cash, and if and essentially 50% to 70% of what the actual cost of the shoe was, and if they gave me cash, then I would I would keep the box, give them the brand new shoes, take their dirty shoes, put them in the box, and I would put them on the shelf there was a shelf for sneakers that were defected. So I would put them on the defected shelf, and I would sell these sneakers. So I was the guy who, people would come to my store to get Jordans, get Nikes, or whatever they want for 50 to 70% off and no tax. And then, I was the guy who would do it at high school. And so I made a good chunk of change. And then, of course, I was wearing the freshest sneakers, all the time, and the freshest clothes because I was able to afford them in high school. I was 15 years old at the time.
Yeah. So you definitely had the entrepreneurial blood from your dad. That was running through your veins.
Absolutely. It was just running the wrong way.
Yeah, it was running the wrong way, but it was still, the foundation was there. And I think you've come full circle nowadays. But I mean, obviously you lost your dad at a very young age, but what kind of impact did not having a father figure have on you growing up, particularly in that, that tough environment in the Bronx?
Well, I mean, first things first, it caused me to search out a father. I think a lot of young kids, males and females, they, just part of our nature is to have a mother and a father, have a, boy, every boy needs a father to teach him how to be a man, and every girl needs a father to teach her how to be loved by a man. Right. And so, so instinctively, I was just, it forced me to search for a father. And, my search led me again, it led me to the street life, because a lot of the men who looked like my father, came from where I came from, and I appealed to the lifestyle that they were presenting through music and through street culture and music videos and those sort of things. So I found a father, but I found a father in a row of things, and that's what led me down my dark path. So essentially, it all goes back to an example. It led me to follow bad examples.
Yeah, and I understand you also found father figures in early 90s hip hop. Yeah,
absolutely. Hip hop culture.
Any particular artists that you were following at the time, or?
Oh, I mean, all of it, Biggie Smalls, Jay-Z, Mobb Deep, Nas, Busta Rhymes. I mean, so many, all of them.
Predominantly East Coast stuff?
Yeah. But then I did also listen to some Tupac and, Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg got in trouble. I tell the story in the book about getting in trouble for having a Snoop Dogg tape in my house. But I listened to as much. And, I wanted to soak it all up. Just again, I wanted the more I can, and that's just always been my personality. When I'm when I find something that I like or that I connect with, I'm 100% in. I mean, I'm gonna research, I'm gonna study, I'm gonna imbibe as much of it as I can.
Yeah, I love that, and I absolutely love that you got in trouble with being caught with a Snoop Dogg cassette at the height of the East-West wars, man. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
But I mean, you mentioned that, you know, by the time you're 19, you're actually doing really well for yourself. You're pulling in thousands and thousands of dollars through your various schemes and drug dealing and whatnot. And essentially you funneled that into essentially trying to follow the footsteps of Puff Daddy and start your own record label.
Yeah. My dream was the reason why I was doing a lot of what I was doing was because I wanted to have a record company. I wanted to have artists signed to me. I wanted to rap myself, but more importantly, I wanted to be a CEO of a record company. I wanted to produce music, and so everything that I was doing, all the money. Well, I wouldn't say all the money, but a majority of the money I was making was being funneled into my record company. I had about 8-9 artists signed to me, and we would go to studios, and I would pay for the studio time. We would go to different events, and I would pay for those events. I would we got shirts, we got it all. We got this album put together. I paid for all of that, for the masters, to get it all produced and everything like that. And our goal was ultimately to put together a compilation album, which we did, and then shot that compilation album to a major record company that would sign us to a label deal, which was happening at the time. A lot of artists, not a lot of CEOs of record companies, small startup record companies were getting signed to big record companies, and they were getting funding, and they would be able to create music and long term. And so that was my goal, and that was my dream. From the time I was 16 to when I eventually ended up leaving for the military.
Right. And what essentially happened there?
Well, the money ran out. I got involved in a deal with a drug dealer that went bad. I sold him some products that were supposed to last for a certain amount of time, only lasted for a fraction of that time. And he came knocking on my door and threatened my life in so many words. And that's when I decided, I paid him his money back. And that's when I decided, I'm getting out of the game, the legal game. And I did. And when I got out of the game illegally, there was no way for me to keep up with the finances. It was just running a record company is very, very expensive, especially when you have 8 artists. You got to feed them, you got to, travel with them, you got to pay for travel expenses, you got to pay for studio time. That stuff is very expensive, and I couldn't afford to pay for it anymore. So, so I tried, to get a label deal in the short period of time as the money was running out, and we couldn't get signed to a major record company. So, what it all boiled down to was, we had to shut the company down, and it was heartbreaking. And for 6 months, I tried to figure out what to do, couldn't. And then finally, I just decided, I don't want to have anything to do with the military, but it seems like that's my only way. That's my only course of action. It was a survival decision. I was, in my mind, I figured I was going to either end up dead or in prison if I stayed in the Bronx. And, so joining the military was a survival decision for me.
Yeah. And it's funny how sometimes in life we need to hit rock bottom and have someone knock on our door and give us all sorts of threats and threaten our family before, we need to truly suffer before we start to take that action that we know deep down we needed to take all along.
Absolutely.
So, having joined the Navy, the Navy, from the outside looking in, all about authority, discipline, working hard, early mornings, all that sort of stuff. Having come from the streets where I guess maybe the same sort of characteristics aren't enshrined, how did that transition go at first?
It was easy for me. It was easy for me because I had a lot of people I didn't want to let down, one of which was my recruiter who got me into the Navy because I had 2 warrants out for my arrest. And,
that was Tiana Reyes, right?
Yeah, Tiana Reyes. Yep. Yeah. She took a huge risk on me and took me to the judges to get my record expunged. And then she stuck me in the Navy, and so, and then, on top of that, even though she got my record expunged, I still had to pay these court fees and court fines, which were about $800. And I couldn't afford to do it. My mom couldn't afford to do it. But my Aunt Doki, she pulled out all of the money in her savings to pay that off. So when I got into the Navy, both of them were in the back of my mind every day. It was just like, I can't fail. I can't act like a hooligan. I have to maintain a standard because these people, they stepped out on a limb for me. They took a risk by doing what they did for me. And if I, go against the grain, then I'm gonna pretty much hurt them. And I didn't want to hurt them. I wanted to show them that, what they did was not in vain. So that's what drove me to stay committed. And that's what made the transition for me really, really easy. I just simply did what I was told to do.
Yeah. Well, I guess people had expectations that you were essentially living up to. And I know you had to learn a lot of things from scratch. You walked several miles a day to a swimming pool where you taught yourself to swim and numerous other things. I mean, what was your relationship like with your ego essentially when you're trying to learn all these things from scratch and probably not being very good at them to start with?
You know what? I don't know. As far as my relationship with my ego, I don't know how to answer that. But what I can say is that I just wanted it, man. I mean, I wanted to be I mean, just to kind of give a bit more context, the reason why I would run 3 miles to the pool and then run 3 miles back, to my barracks was because I wanted to be a SEAL, but I was totally unqualified to be a SEAL. So for me, the reason why I did all the extra hard work I had to do is because I had a dream. And as I said earlier, when I want something, I'm gonna put in all the work and more to get it. And so that's essentially what I was doing. I had blinders on. I wasn't paying attention to what was going on the right, what was going on the left. Yep. I wasn't even paying attention much to what was going on internally, whether I was in pain, whether I was cold, whether I was miserable, whether I didn't want to get up out of the bed to do another long run, whether I didn't want to go to the gym to jump on a pull-up bar. None of that stuff bothered me or fazed me. It wasn't even a thought. It was just part of my process was just to continue pushing as hard as I could, to achieve my dream. And, I tell people all the time, every single one of us is going to have deficiencies on the road towards our journey, or on the journey towards our dream. And, I had 3 deficiencies. My dream was to be a SEAL. Once I got into the Navy, I didn't want to be in a regular Navy. I wanted to be part of the best. And, I had 3 deficiencies. 1, I couldn't swim. You got to be able to swim to be a SEAL. 2, I didn't have the academic scores. And 3, I was super skinny. I had no strength at all. But I just did the extra hard work to overcome my deficiencies and not let my deficiencies keep me from becoming what I knew I could become. And, that's what ultimately led me to getting the SEAL training.
Yeah. And I think that's a super valuable lesson. And I think, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Marcus Aurelius, the Roman philosopher king. He basically he used to say that, what stands in the way becomes the way. Essentially what the obstacle is, you've got to overcome that. Otherwise, if you shy away from it, you'll never get to where you want to get to. And in your case, you had all these deficiencies, but you worked really hard. You had this, almost possessed, singular focus on becoming a Navy SEAL.
Yeah,
Love
absolutely.
It. And you were in the Navy for about 14 years, from 2002 to 2016. I know you were stationed over in San Diego for most of the time, but were there any particular missions you were involved with that you'd like to share?
I mean, I deployed all over the Middle East. I won't go into detail on missions I did, but
I'm sure there's a lot of classified information.
Yeah. But most of my deployments were to the Middle East. I was also blessed to travel Southeast Asia and do, but I had a great career. Direct action missions, reconnaissance stuff. I was a human guy, so I did a lot of human intelligence kind of stuff. And, man.
Love it.
Good times.
So, people say that if you take on a heavy load, essentially it forces self-revelation. It forces us to know more about ourselves. So, I mean, in your time in the Navy, what did you learn about yourself that perhaps surprised you?
What did I learn about myself? Oh, well, I mean, one is that, and I kind of knew this about myself early on, but I think it was further cemented, was this concept that I truly can do whatever I want to do. I can accomplish any dream that I have as long as I actually put in the work to do it. I mean, just, getting through SEAL training alone, you got to understand my graduating class started out with 270 and we graduated 29. There's more to the story because in my book I went through pretty much every phase of SEAL training twice. So what did that SEAL training entail, man? Like, give me some examples. Like, what kind of stuff did you have to go through? I mean, it's just a torture program. I mean, you go through every guy that shows up to BUDS, we call it BUDS, Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Training. But every guy who shows up, he has what it takes physically, because you have to pass a physical screening test, which consists of a run, swim, push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups, and that sort of thing. So if you could pass that screening test, then you've essentially told the Navy that you're physically qualified to be a Navy SEAL, or to get through SEAL training. So the question is now, do you have what it takes mentally? And that's the hard thing to gauge. That's why, the attrition rate is so high. And so when you get the buds, it's yes, you go through physical things like runs and long swims, up to 5-mile swims. You do. I think the longest run I did was 14-mile rucksack run. I think that was an SQT. Wow. And then you got to go through survival school. You got Hell Week, where they keep you up for 6 days straight. Starts on Sunday, ends on Friday. They torture you. Cold water immersion, where they just lay you in freezing cold water for you don't know how long it's going to be, and guys just start quitting because it's freezing cold. On every swim, at the end of every swim, I was either hypothermic or borderline hypothermic because I was a slower swimmer, and the Pacific Ocean around Coronado, San Diego gets really, really cold. So they torture you with the cold. They just did, but everything is to beat you down mentally. Yeah, there's tons of mind games. They use physical tools to just mess with you mentally, and that's SEAL training in a nutshell. It's just one big torture fest, and it's who can withstand the pain, the torture, the over and over and over again, day after day after day for 6 months, and still be standing. That's just what it boils down to.
Yeah, sounds absolutely brutal.
And not many people could do it.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say there. The physical stuff, the push-ups and everything else. Sure, I can see a lot of people I know doing that, but the mental stuff, that takes a certain kind of character. And I had George St. Pierre make an appearance on the podcast about a year ago, and UFC champion several times over. And what he was saying is, success is confidence plus skill. The skill isn't enough. If you have the skill, but you don't have the confidence or the mentality, you're going to tap out at the first sign of adversity. Yeah.
That's 100%. That's spot on. Yeah. I like that.
So what rank did you essentially ascend to after 14 years, Remi?
Oh, E6.
Yep. So, given that, and I guess a lot of people listening to this show, they're probably leading teams in the corporate world. They're probably leading entrepreneurial teams, startups and whatnot. From your perspective, how do you get the best out of people?
My number one answer is I care about them.
Yeah.
I care about them. I think, we live in a culture, and we live in a world in general where a lot of leaders, they just see their subordinates as a stepping stone, right? To get to the next rank, or, to make some extra money, or whatever the idea is. And, just from what I learned in the military and in business in general, is that, if you take a genuine interest in the people that you lead, they will be willing to run through walls for you. But when you just see a person as a stepping stone, they'll do their job. They'll do their job. But most of them will. But that's it. When people work for me, I don't want a person who's just going to just do their job. I want a person that's going to go above and beyond the standard. I want a person who's going to work towards excellence, right? And so when you take a genuine interest, and what I mean by that is, and I don't necessarily mean getting personal. And I'll just kind of give some more context. I was on the deployment. I had a team leader. He was an officer. He's in charge of our platoon, and he would pull me aside sometimes. Like, you pull each guy aside, like individually sometimes, just be like, hey, how's it going? How are things back home? Yeah. How's your mom? Yeah. Like, how's your wife? How's this? Like, what can I do to serve you? How can I help? And he wasn't doing it to pry into our business. He was just doing it because he genuinely cared about us. And by doing that, he showed us by asking us, inquiring about our lives, not just the job. Yes, he asked about the job. How are things going in your department? How are things going, for this mission prep? Yes, he asked about, but by genuinely asking about us as human beings and caring about us as human beings, that made me want to work harder for him, 10 times harder for him. And that's a philosophy that I apply. How do you get the best out of your people? Show them that you care about them.
Yep.
Show them that you care about them,
Love it, love it. And it actually aligns with a book I read recently by Eric Schmidt, who was the CEO at Google for almost 20 years. One thing they do over there is trip reports. So if they have a meeting of some kind, they'll spend the first 10 minutes literally talking about each other's weekends. How was the kids' soccer game? All that sort of stuff. Really getting to know the people behind, the title before they start talking about business, because they feel like that sets up the scene for a more cohesive, rewarding business relationship as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, what does leadership mean to you then, Remi?
What does leadership mean to me? Serving.
Serving. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it means to me.
Beautiful.
I mean, to be a leader is essentially to be a servant.
Yeah. To be selfless and to be serving the cause, essentially.
Yeah. Serving the cause, serving your people, right? Kind of going back to my first leadership point about caring about your people. You're just driving the train, man. You're driving the train, but guess what? There's people riding the train. So that's what leadership is to me. And everything that I do, because I own 2 companies. I own a production company. I also own a consulting firm, and I consult with pro athletes, collegiate athletes, corporations, that sort of thing. And I have people who work for me, man. And one thing that I try to focus on is, one thing that I've learned over the years is that everything that I do at the top is meant to keep this train running for people below me and people who are equivalent to me. And if I fail, or if I don't show up, if I don't make the right decision, if I don't invest properly, everything below me falls apart. Right. So that motivates me. That motivates me is, to drive the train that people are riding on. I work in the nonprofit space as well. I was actually at Rikers Island jail last week, which is one of the worst jails in the country in the United States. Historically, it's a notorious jail. And I couldn't go there and do what I did there without the finances that my company provides. Right. So I can't go serve those people in the jail without my company being successful. So it's the cycle. I work hard so that I can have what I need, and so that my people can have what they need, so that we could do the job. So I don't know if that all makes sense.
No, that makes perfect sense. That makes perfect sense. And it ties in beautifully with what you said earlier about caring for your people. You're riding the train, well, you're driving the train, but there's people riding the train. By caring about them, you're going to wake up every day, you're going to put in the time. And by putting in the time, you get the results, the financial capital that frees you up to do the kinds of things that you really want to do, like all the nonprofit work that you're doing, which is absolutely fantastic. And so, you came from royalty, you ended up on the streets of the Bronx, you then joined the Navy, and now you're an actor. How did that come about, Remi?
I came about by me minding my own business. I was actually in grad school at the time, finishing up my master's in organizational strategy, and my phone rang, and there was a person on the other end of the line, and she was looking for a former Navy SEAL with my background to do one day of acting on a movie. That movie happened to be a big blockbuster film called Transformers. I said, sure. That one day turned into 3 weeks, and 3 weeks turned into 6 months on the film. And that's how I got into acting. That's how I got into Hollywood, because I'm not just an actor. I'm a writer, and now moving into producing. And so that's what kind of launched my career in Hollywood. Again, I was not searching for it. It wasn't my plan. I was finishing up my master's to focus on consulting and public speaking, but it just came knocking on my door, and so I took advantage of it. And that's another lesson I try to teach people all the time. It's be open to the unexpected. Be open to the unexpected. Being an actor was never anything that was on my bucket list. But when that phone call rang, I was just like, it's not what I want to do. It's not who I am, but let me just check it out and see where it goes. And it's gone.
It's awesome, man. It's something that I say to a lot of entrepreneurs and young entrepreneurs coming up is, make some space for serendipity. Like, focus on the prize, but don't say no to absolutely everything, because there may be some awesome opportunities that you miss out on if you do.
Absolutely. And, another point, that comes from that whole acting thing is, nothing is wasted. You never know how what you're doing now, is preparing you for your future. Like I never knew being on a movie set that taking orders from my platoon, OIC was preparing me to take orders from a director. I never knew that, doing speaking events and doing public speaking at corporations was preparing me to deliver lines on a movie set with, 100 people on set and the camera's on me and a director saying action, right? Mm-hmm. But, everything that we do in life, unbeknownst to us, there are times when the things we do prepare us for our future. And so it's important that we take the lessons, catalog them the best we can, and apply them. And I was just instinctively cataloging my lessons. And when it came time for me to get into the movie business, I just applied what I learned over the course of 13 years in the military. And that's what essentially helped me.
Yeah, and I think there's a Miyamoto Musashi quote. I think he wrote the Book of Five Rings, I believe it is, in which he says, if you know the way broadly, you will see it in everything. And I think it's so powerful. The time you spend in the Navy, you can apply that to so many different things. The time you spend in acting, Absolutely. The lessons you learn, you apply in other things, and it just transfers so beautifully. And I think a lot of people miss that point when they think, well, if I invest in this, then I'm going to, I'm a specialist in that. And then if that goes belly up, then I'm going to not have any transferable skills, but it's just not true.
No, absolutely. And it's funny because I was actually thinking about this the other day. I'm going to try to tell the story without kind of saying names or anything like that. Sure. But somebody reached out to me on social media about 2 months ago, and they read my book, and they work for a major production company in Hollywood. And they were like, hey, I read your book. I see this as a movie. I see TV shows coming out of this. I see a whole lot. Can you come down to my office so that we can talk? And so I went to the office in LA, had a great meeting. This person was just like, we're going to put together this amazing pitch deck and pitch this to our executives at the executives at this company. This should be an easy sell. And I'm just like, cool, Roger that. So I work with this person on the pitch deck. It's going to go to this person's bosses. And, a week goes by, nothing. Another week goes by, nothing happens. And then finally, like, one of the executives from one department said, you know what, it's not our type of content. It's a great content, but it's just not our type of content. Like, I recommend that, you guys go to a different, production company that will work on it, because it was just a type of because within this company, they have different platforms. So one platform could be TV, one platform could be digital, one platform could be film, right? So there was just one executive who ran this one platform who said, this platform that I'm in charge of, it was not going to be a good fit for. So when that happened, I was a bit discouraged because, but at the same time, I asked myself, why did all of this happen? And long story short, there's more to the story. That pitch deck is now essentially being used for a plethora of studios and production companies who are now super interested because of that pitch deck. Now, that pitch deck would have never been developed if that one person never reached out to me on social media and said, I believe in this content. We need to put together a pitch deck so we can pitch to my bosses. Yeah, it didn't work out with one of the bosses. The other bosses are still up in the air with the other bosses. So that still might work out. But now we have something for a large pool of companies where we can create a bidding war, and we could actually almost demand what we want. And so anyway, going back to nothing is wasted. You never know. I never knew that it didn't turn out the way I wanted it to turn out initially, but it's working out in a different way now, almost in a better way now.
Yeah. And that's a valuable lesson as well for a lot of people listening. I think that it comes back to, every no gets you closer to a yes. And by doing the work, you learn what works, what doesn't, but it also improves your capability to sell yourself, because by putting together that proposal, you had to think about all these things that perhaps you hadn't thought about previously. And now when you're having conversations with, execs from other production houses, it's just the answers are there because you've thought about it all.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
Beautiful. So I take it the title of your new book, Transformed, was inspired by your role in Transformers, Remi?
My publisher came up with that title. I guess they were trying to, give it a play on the film Transformers. So I'm assuming so. Yes.
Love it. Well, I mean, it essentially unpacks everything we've talked about today. And I mean, what was essentially the inspiration behind wanting to tell your story? Because I imagine the idea of just sitting down to write a book, I mean, a lot of people think about it, but not many people actually sit down to do it. So was there a sort of moment that pushed you in that direction?
Yeah, I would say it was probably, course of a few years, people who just heard, before I was even a Navy SEAL, people who just heard the part of my story going from Africa to the Bronx were just like, wow, that's a fascinating story. Your dad was this chief and your royalty and your last name means this. Wow, you need to write a book. And then when I became a Navy SEAL and then got out of the SEAL teams, people were like, dude, you went from African royalty to the Bronx drug dealer to a Navy SEAL. Like, dude, you need to write a book. It's super inspiring. And for years I said no, because there's a stigma attached to SEALs who write books, and I didn't want to be put in a category that would kind of jeopardize my reputation within the community. And then finally, Transformers came out, and I went on a press tour for it. And part of that press tour was a big U.S. TV show called Today Show. I'm not sure if you guys have it down in Australia, but it's called the Today Show, and on the air, Kathy Lee Gifford, who was the host at the time, she said, listen, Remi, your story is super inspiring. You need to write a book. Your book needs to be made into a movie. And, I kind of not frowned, but I kind of gave a false smile on air. And then when we went backstage, she reiterated, Remi, you really need to write a book. Like, it could help so many people. And I said no. And she asked why. And I explained to her why. And she was just like, Remi, like, I know that if you wrote a book, it wouldn't be to beat your own chest. It would be it would be for the right reasons, and just think about writing it from the right perspective. And when she said that, and a few other things that she said, that's what was the catalyst for me to write a book. And then she put her money where her mouth was, and she walked me to the publisher, HarperCollins, and told them, you need to sign this guy to a book deal now, or I'm going to take him somewhere else. And that's how I got my book deal. So that's how it all happened. Again, just like the movie thing, I was not trying to write a book. It wasn't, it wasn't my plan. It wasn't anything that, I wanted to do. Somebody kind of pushed me in that direction, and I just went with the flow.
Yeah. And it sounds like, you came full circle there, because I know that while you lived in, poverty growing up in the Bronx, your mom instilled the importance of education and the power of writing into you and your siblings. So what was it like sitting down to write that book? Was it comfortable, or was it something that was marred by a lot of frustration and learning as you went?
I think it was a combination. I think, starting out, I had this fear that I couldn't write the book. So when I signed a contract with the publisher, I signed a contract for my mom to write the book. And that kind of taught me a very important lesson. And that's never let fear keep you from doing what you're called to do, or never let fear keep you from even trying or starting to do what you're called to do. And, my mom wrote the first 2 chapters, and I read them, about a month later, and I was just like, wow, this is not me. It's not my voice. It's not my story. It's her story. And so I pretty much scrapped what she wrote and started all over again. And,
hopefully she wasn't too offended.
No, she wasn't. I think she understood. She understood that it needed to be my voice. And, obviously the beginning is a bit hard, but once I got into the flow, that's when it really started. Life was I knew where I was going, once I got into the flow. And I did a lot of research. It's something I tell people when it comes to writing. You have to research. I don't care if it's your story. I don't care how close you are to the story. You still have to do research, because research just opens up the world to you. It just helps paint a picture. And so I did a lot of research, ongoing research as I wrote, interviewed people who I grew up with, interviewed girls who I dated, interviewed all kinds of different people. And then, I got halfway through the writing process, and there's a whole lot to the story. The publisher wanted me to hire a ghostwriter. I capitulated, hired a ghostwriter, fired the ghostwriter after I read the first 4 lines of what they wrote, because the ghostwriter was supposed to write the last half of the book. I fired him after I read the first 5 lines of chapter 15, which was I finished chapter 14, and publisher freaked out and said, we can't believe you did this. We're not going to have a book. And again, I could have easily allowed that fear to keep me from doing what I was called to do. But I finally took a stand and said, I'm not going to let that fear stop me from writing. I need to write this book. And I knocked out the rest of the book in a month and a half, and less than a month and a half, because, you know, I was January 26, 2018 when I fired the ghostwriter, and I had to turn in my book on March 15th. I turned it in on March 8th of 2018. And that's how I got the book. But yeah, you know, once I got into the flow, it was easy.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, whenever we're looking, you know, down at a blank canvas, it can be very intimidating. But once you start writing, you know, 50 words, 100 words in, you start building momentum. There's a bit of a dopamine hit. It's so much easier to just keep going.
Yeah. And now it's like literally like writing is my life. You know, I just finished writing an espionage thriller that's getting ready to get wrapped up in all of these movie deals.
Awesome.
I'm writing that's my second film. I'm actually at the computer writing my second film right before we got on the Skype. You know, it's a historical Black war film about one of the first groups of African Americans to serve in special operations. So excited about that. So writing is my life now.
Love it. So is this something that your production company will be working on, or?
Yeah.
Beautiful.
So the espionage thriller, this film, The Last Shall Be First, that I'm writing now, and then my book is going to be adapted into a film. I already wrote the opening for that, the opening screenplay for that. So I still got a lot more work to do on that, but I just need to knock out this script first.
That's awesome, man. So, I mean, it sounds like you always had this sort of creativity, this desire to create deep within you, going back to the record label days in your teens. So, you know, I'm really, you know, from my perspective, I'm just, you know, it's really awesome to see that it's now all coming to fruition. The books, you know, the films, it's really a fantastic story of triumph over adversity. And I guess that's what you're essentially hoping people will get out of your book. You know, people who perhaps are struggling with life, with business, with whatever the case is, inspiration, but also some kind of action plan, I take it.
No, absolutely. That's why and that's the heart of the book. The heart of the book is, it's a story. It's a cool story, but at the end of the day, it's a book of lessons, you know. And I think that the biggest lesson in the book is failure, because when you read the book, you'll notice that it's a story of a man who failed over and over and over and over again. In every aspect of life. But you know, it's also a story of a person who finally realized that, you know what, I'm not going to let my failure define my future. Instead, I'm going to find the lessons within my failure to use to create a new future. And so that's what I hope that people get out of the book is, none of us, I don't care how high up you are on the food chain as it relates to your company, or whether you're an entrepreneur, or whether it's a startup, or how low, where you are within the spectrum, you're going to fail at some point at something in your life. And it's so easy to allow that failure to define you. But don't let it. A failure is only a failure if you don't learn from it. If you learn from it, that it's a lesson, and you could take that lesson and turn it into a success. And literally, that is the whole story of the book, is how do I take my failures and turn them into lessons and use those lessons for successes.
Absolutely beautiful. And anybody who wants those lessons, or anybody who is struggling in any capacity in life, definitely should pick up Transformed, a Navy SEAL's unlikely journey from the throne of Africa to the streets of the Bronx to defying all odds. Man, this has been a fantastic conversation, Remi. But before we go, I've got to throw you into our 3-question lightning round. Are you ready to rock and roll?
Yeah, but real quick, I had a question for you. Is this selling on ebooks or audiobooks in Australia? How did you get your copy?
Through Amazon, man. So we've got Amazon AU here. So it's available to all Australians online. Nice. And I believe I did see it over at the local bookstore, Dimmicks in Melbourne recently. So I believe there are physical copies on shelves too, man. So
cool.
No stress.
I was curious about that, because I had somebody message me from Australia, and he was like on Instagram, and they like, man, how do I get a copy of your book down here in Australia? And I was like, I think you could get it on an ebook. I don't know the process.
Man, they can definitely get it on Audible, on Amazon. So we'll add all the links to the show notes for our listeners on that point anyways, man.
Awesome.
Beautiful. So 3-question lightning round. Question number 1, Remi. If you could work for any company at any stage of the company life cycle, so we could be talking about, Bad Boy Records in the early 90s, which company would it be and why?
Ooh, that's a good one, man. Man, I would say Apple under Steve Jobs.
Yeah, awesome. And why is that?
Just so that I could just get some insight into the man's mind, you know, through osmosis, just learn from him, you know, how he was able to come up with the ideas he came up with, how he was able to implement them. Because he came up with some wild ideas that, you know, I'm sure people at that time would say, you're crazy. That's ridiculous. But now look at what those ideas have turned into. My computer is an Apple. My iPhone that I'm on right now is an Apple. My iPad is an Apple. Everything's Apple, you know? So just how do you create content that, or you know, an IP that is long lasting, that outlasts your own lifespan. So
well, he did have something he called a reality distortion field, where, like you said, crazy ideas no one believed in but him. So he had to just distort reality and just push through anyways. So love that. Question number 2, Remi. If you could ask anyone a question, dead or alive, who would it be and what would you ask?
Dead or alive, who would it be? What? Oh, James Baldwin.
Yeah, what would you ask him?
He is my favorite writer. I would ask him, it would have to be a writing question. I'm just trying to think of that writing question. Tell me about your writing process. Yeah. Tell me about your writing process.
Beautiful. Yeah, no, I've had
no. Can I write your movie?
Oh, there we go.
Can I adapt your life into a movie? That's probably one of my passion projects.
Maybe you ask him the first question and then you use the answer to that to write the actual movie.
There you go.
There you go. And lucky last, Remi, what kind of rituals or routines do you have to stay on top of your game on a daily basis? I imagine you've still got a lot of stuff that you picked up in the Navy, but what do you do when you get up in the morning? What's your routine look like?
Yeah, when I get up in the morning, you know, first thing I try to do is pray, you know, read some scripture, some verses from the Bible a bit, just to kind of get my mind focused. And then, you know, I juice fresh vegetables in the morning. I juice broccoli, celery, ginger, kale, few strawberries, carrots, that sort of thing, just to kind of put a lot of pulp in there. Doesn't taste the best, but it kind of gets the system pumping. And then, you know, from there, you know, I make my kids breakfast, my wife breakfast, take my kids to school. I love spending time with my kid. I got 3 sons. My oldest is 5, my middle is 4, my youngest is 3 months. And then from there I go to the gym. I get my workout on, and you know, that's where a lot of ideas come to me, is through working out. And then I get to the computer and I write, and that's my day.
Beautiful. Absolutely love it, man. Sounds like a pretty solid morning routine. So, Remi, as I said, fantastic conversation, and people should definitely head out and pick up a copy of Transformed. And if they want to find out more about you or connect with you, they can do so both on Twitter and Instagram at Remi Adeleke. Are there any other sites we should point them to?
Facebook, LinkedIn.
Awesome.
Those are the big ones.
Those are the big ones.
Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter.
Perfect. I'll add those to the show notes. Thanks, Remi. Hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, brother. You too have a fantastic start of your day, because I know the day's kind of starting out there, right?
It's 8:23 in the morning. So, Hi guys, Steve again. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to receive a weekly email from me, complete with reflections, books I've been reading, words of wisdom, and access to blogs, ebooks, and more that I'm publishing on a regular basis, just leave your details at futuresquared.xyz/subscribe and you'll receive the very next one. If you're picking up what I'm putting down, take a minute to like, share, or subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. It goes a long way to giving the podcast the exposure it needs, so I can continue bringing you guests and conversations of the highest caliber. You can catch me on Twitter at Steve Gliveski and on Instagram at TheSteveGliveski. Until next time.
Hasta la vista, baby.